Hey there, welcome into another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry, and in today's episode, we get into some presidential polling, some U.S. Senate polling in Texas, the impeached Attorney General and his misgivings about what his future could be, and I get into a local issue here in the Hub City. So with that said, I don't have any fancy music to play for you, but that's the breaks of getting into podcasting. Is we'll slowly get into that. But that said, let's get into it. So when it comes to presidential polling, a poll that was released today on Friday the 12th of July said that there's been really no change in the presidential race. That's coming from NPR and Marist Polling. No change at all. Nationally, really not a whole lot of changes throughout the states. It's going to be a very close election. I think that's the takeaway that everyone needs to remember. Biden, current President Biden, former President Trump are all within the margin of errors. And what's going to really happen here isn't so much the debate that happened a few weeks ago. Because as I've said before, come October, when Texans and other states start to early vote, people are going to forget about that. They're going to remember what they're feeling at that moment, And so, what is a big indicator for that could be the economy. And if Republicans are smart, and they're usually pretty good campaigners, excuse me, they will talk about inflation. They will spend time saying how inflation. Take a page out of Bill Clinton's playbook. It's the economy, stupid. Let that be it. Talk about that as much as you can. Whereas Democrats are going to talk about other issues, such as abortion rights or democratic values or whatever the case may be. And all those things are going to hit home for millions of people. But if you think it's going to be that debate that happened back in June, that's a deciding factor, we're seeing numbers that are suggesting that it isn't. And it's never was going to be. Because there's so much history here on debates that have gone several times to say that they just simply don't matter to voters. A lot of the time is you don't learn anything and voters have already made their minds up. And there's been some evidence to suggest that before voters even watched that debate, they already had their minds made up. So, and you always have to ask yourself, what else did you learn from that debate? Like, what was something that you didn't know? Well, no one really learned anything new. So with that in mind, you have to ask yourself, what was the point of that debate? Well, it's really been bad news for the last few weeks, really for Biden and the Democrats. Not so much in numbers and polling and all that stuff that has come out recently, especially in swing states, the quote-unquote blue wall states of Pennsylvania, of Michigan and Wisconsin. Those are all vital states that the president and Trump and the former president need to win this particular race. But it's been bad news for him when it comes to donors, and I've kind of called this a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the average everyday voter isn't really paying much attention to things right this very second. But when the media came out and said, "Oh my gosh, this is so staggering. This is so awful. This is the worst thing in the world. Oh my gosh," Chicken Little freak out, as I called in my piece in the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. That's when the big started to really come inside for Democratic circles. And then you got this whole idea that maybe since the convention is going to be in Chicago, and since there might be a push to have a new nominee, this is all going back to 1968. And do a little bit of history on this. reacquaint yourself with 1968, just the year itself, to be honest, and then you get to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. You're talking about a whole new situation here. And yes, Mayor Daley's not there. And it's not even anyone of that sort of character is mayor of Chicago anymore. But it's almost like we're going backwards in thinking as to what could happen at this convention, because you constantly are seeing people, mainly Democratic elites, mainly the chatter people, are making a very big deal about it. And there was just something that was released today that said, "Hey, look, there's the largest super PAC is freezing its donors. I'm sorry, the donors to the largest super PAC for Democrats are freezing their money if Biden stays on the ticket." And that has been a sticking point for Democrats, even though Biden has constantly said, I'm not leaving. And the numbers have suggested that it doesn't do the Democrats any good or any worse if he's on the ticket. There's nothing statistically significant to suggest a change with Biden is going to change the results. So what's the point? Like, we have to remember, like, there's a really good book about the 2012 election about it's called Double Down. Game Change, Double Down. It's kind of like the sequel to the book of Game Change that came out in 2008. And it talks about how the Obama campaign thought about replacing Biden with Hillary Clinton. And they did some polling, and guess what they found? No major change. Duh, because vice presidents are not real, or even vice presidential candidates are not real reasons for people to go vote. I mean, you don't really find a lot of voters saying, "Well, I'm going to vote for Trump because of J.D. Vance or whoever he's going to pick for his running mate," or "I'm really going to vote for Biden because of Kamala Harris," or even vice versa. You don't really find people saying that's why. Not to say it doesn't happen, but by and large, those people who do that are a pretty small number of voters. So the point I'm making here is that the ones who are making a big deal about this are all insiders. And they actually think that voters care about a debate performance in June. How out of touch is the inner circle here? I mean, this is silliness. This is truly a Game of Thrones right here. They all think people care, when in reality, they really don't. And the numbers have been showing that. Just another poll that was released just yesterday from the University of Houston has said this: even after Trump's conviction and all the concerns over Biden's age, his poor debate performance, and R.F. Kennedy Jr.'s high-profile interest into the race, voters haven't changed their minds about the candidate, says Renee Cross, who's a researcher and senior executive director of the Hobby School of the University of Houston. Voters know these candidates, and little seems likely to sway their opinions. Okay? That is very noticeable in the fact that Trump is leading Biden in Texas now. He's leading Biden in Texas 49-40. Okay? 49% of respondents of the recent Hobby School of Public Affairs at Houston and the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University said that 49% of respondents in Texas prefer Trump, 40% prefer Biden. And again, Renee Cross has said here, no one's really changed their mind. And I think that's going to continue to really happen here. All right. So all the media talk about Biden's age, all the opinion pieces and the guest essays that come across everything here, you have to realize that they're the ones who care about it. They're the ones making the big deal about it. All right? About that. And it's not about his age. It's about the debate. Okay? Because and I will say this, there are surveys, numbers, and data to suggest that a lot of respondents in polls have said that they have a concern about the president's age. But when they're asked who they're going to vote for between Trump or Biden, that hasn't changed. You still have a very close margin of people who will say, I'm voting for Trump or I'm voting for Biden. So it's not like, oh yes, he's Biden, the current president is very old, therefore I'm going to vote for another old man. No one's saying that. At least in great numbers and great detail. So as we continue on in this campaign, as the conventions keep rolling up here, the chatterverse, the inside people, this ring of people, they're the ones who are clamoring for it all, where it seems right now that a lot of the voters have not changed their minds. All right, now I want to kind of shift gears here and get into the talk of the race between Colin Allred, Congressman Allred from the Dallas area, and incumbent Republican Ted Cruz for the U.S. Senate race. Cruz's seat is up for re-election. Cruz is running again for a third term. That hasn't been any sort of question at all. And what's interesting is that in this same poll that found Trump 49, Biden 40, you have Ted Cruz 47, Colin Allred 44. You have a 3-point difference here between these two. This is a very tight race now, according to this particular survey. And that is down from Cruz, who led by 9 last winter. So Allred, it seems like, is making some inroads here. And that's good for Allred. But one thing that I have to say, and I've said this, I don't know how many times I've said this, and I'll keep saying it, is that what keeps Texas the red state that it is, the Republican state that it is West Texas, is the rural areas. From the Panhandle down to San Angelo, you could even go even further down to McAllen. You've got a tremendously large swath of land. You've got about maybe 2 million voters. Maybe 1.5 million voters there, and you couple in East Texas in there. You've got a big part, and those areas are what keeps Texas the Republican state that it is. And you say, well, Drew, now, hold on now. Those metroplexes are becoming much more democratic than what they have in the past. And those suburb areas are becoming much more democratic than in the past. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And it's the same people who are voting. So while Dallas is becoming more democratic, while San Antonio and Houston are becoming more democratic, and Fort Bend County, your flip counties, your battleground counties like Williamson and Hayes and even Tarrant County, those can possibly be flipped from one to the other, and they're flipping because of the Latino vote. So what about the Valley, Drew? What about the Valley? Zapata County. That went for Trump. Yeah, it also went for Abbott. Yeah. That whole Valley region, that whole South Texas, Rio Grande Valley region, that's probably not going to be changed anytime soon. Even with all the problems with Henry Cuellar, Congressman Cuellar, all of his issues, that area is going to be a solidly Democratic area for some time. Special elections are special. That's why they're called special elections. They are special. Okay? They have very small turnout, and Maya Flores found out, that it doesn't always work in your favor in that way. So while that was a tremendous achievement for her, and I don't want to belittle that, that doesn't really speak for the region by and large. But it has to be said here, and this is the point that I'm getting to, that if Democrats ever want to get serious about winning statewide, they have to compete in rural areas. I'm not saying the win. That's not going to happen for a long time either. But we constantly see Democrats in other states who are able to compete in rural areas, and you even have great examples as to Democrats who have won in rural areas across the country. You want to look at Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez out of Washington, the 3rd congressional district in Washington, heavily rural. All right, she ends up winning because she's one of them. The Maine 2nd congressional district, which has voted for Trump for the last 2 elections, its congressperson is a Democrat. Let me give you another good example here. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky. He's a Democrat. Democrats are able to compete in rural areas when the party gives them the ability to compete in rural areas. It's not so much about the naivete of certain voters in particular rural states, as is suggested in the book called What's the Matter with Kansas. It's much more along the lines of Harvest the Vote. That's by Jane Kleeb, who is the former Democratic chair, maybe the current Democratic chair in Nebraska, who has a lot of details about how the rural vote is going to be the future. And that's the only way that this is really going to truly happen for Texas, is not that the metroplexes just can continually grow and become much more democratic, but you have to find a way to have some sort of competition in the rural areas, at least in your medium-sized cities such as Lubbock, Amarillo, Wichita Falls, San Angelo, Midland, Odessa, Abilene, Longview, okay, in these areas. So while these are really good numbers for Colin Allred, and they are, again, we are 3 months away from early voting. We don't know if Allred's going to be at the national convention. You would think that he would be because, Ted Cruz has said it himself. Outside of Trump, they hate him more. He's the most hated Republican. I don't think he's wrong about that. I also think he's the only one in the Senate who likes him. But look, what matters is winning, and make no mistake about it, Ted Cruz is really good at that. He knows what to say and when to say it and how to say it, and he's really good at campaigning, and he's trying this bipartisan approach, taking credit for things that he didn't vote for, and I mentioned that in a piece in the AJ, which his staff was not too thrilled about. But that said, this looks like it's tightening up. We'll see if this continues for the next few months. This could be one to watch. Of course, maybe this is an outlier. We'll see some more polling coming from the University of Texas and the Texas Politics Project. We'll see what they do, and what other types of data that will come around. I'm pretty interested in knowing that. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is our ever so great Attorney General in Ken Paxton. Paxton has claimed that he was going to have some sort of re-impeachment, that the House was convening to impeach him a second time. Well, here's the quote here. He says, taken from the Texas Tribune in some great reporting from Zach Despard and Jasper Scherer. where they say that, where they're quoting the Attorney General says, next week's House General Investigating Committee is yet another desperate attempt by the Republican establishment to impeach me. Their bitter opposition with taking me down knows no bounds, and they will stop at nothing to remove me from office. Well, he didn't have any sort of evidence for that. State Representative Andrew Murr, who at a junction, has said this has nothing to do with him, and you shouldn't believe the Attorney General. You know, he's a liar, and so it had to do with something else. So Murr actually felt forced to comment to say this has nothing to do with anybody. So this has nothing to do with the Attorney General. Let me clarify. Don't believe him. So you have to wonder, what was Paxton doing? Look, Paxton is a political animal. All right? He's out for himself. Make no mistake about that. He is out for himself. So when he says things like this, you have to always kind of think about the subplot. Like, is there going to be some sort of a swerve, to use another term? And you have to think that the swerve here would be to get people in his party excited about him again. And to get enough people in his party who would call these Murr and some of the other people to say, don't you dare do this. Has to be something along those lines. But it's so funny to me that Paxton wants to talk about this. He wants to get out in front to try to do a swerve. You know, get everyone riled up about something that isn't there, to force the hand of Andrew Murr, and, well, Murr felt, that he had to say something, so he did. All this is public. I'm not saying anything that isn't, so you can you can Google what Andrew Murr's statement was, and you can find that out there. So the Attorney General is just filled with drama. Like, he's so middle school. It's just laughable and roll your eyes about. The last thing that I want to mention to you here is, again, this is a local issue, so those who are outside of Lubbock, you may not be too concerned with this, but there was this issue with what's called the sewer lateral line, okay? And how that works is that Lubbock has a lot of alleys, and a lot of alleys are dirt. There are becoming a growth of paved alleys, which is causing more issues with this. But aside from that, is that we have a lateral sewer line that goes from a homeowner's sewer private line that's in your backyard. Let's just say, just for sake of argument here, and then it goes to the alley lateral line down to the main line. It's called the tap. And this is incredibly complicated, all right? But the conversation revolves around who owns what and where. And I wish this was a simple issue. This was a simple answer, but it's not. I asked, and I was honored to serve on this committee. And I felt that it was the city's job to pay for the rest of that, to continue paying for the replacement of a sewer lateral line. Now, how long does the lateral line last you? If it's normal wear and tear, and you treat it correctly, and you don't, mess with it, about 50, 60 years. And where we are seeing a lot of the problems happening is through this pipe that is made out of what's called Orangeburg. Orangeburg has been described as like a toilet paper roll, and that's the strength of it. And I don't think that's far off. There's plenty of images you can find on Orangeburg, but about 85% of the problems that were coming from the lateral line were because of Orangeburg. Cities can't be proactive in this. Okay? They can only be reactive with this. That's one thing that I learned on this because of laws, and we can't. One of our suggestions would have been to suggest that the city the city mandates that every house gets inspected for having an Orangeburg home, and that gets replaced. You can't force that. All right, so that was one big aspect about it. There were 11 of us on this committee, and we had a really good chair, and he wanted everybody's input, and I value that. A lot of the time, I was the lone person who would lose, and that's fine. Votes are taken. You either win or you don't, and if you don't, you live with it and you move on. I had to remind the chair about that because he goes, "Hey, look, I know this was a close vote," and I said, "Look, I lost the vote, so be it. Let's move on." So, what we were able to do was there were a majority of those on the committee who felt that the owner needed to pay for the replacement of the sewer lateral line. As this was continuing on, we started to have some evolution of opinions because we're already paying for it in a way of rates, and so. And we continue to find out about the average salary here and that what the average cost of such a repair is. So we were able to get to suggest to the city that they pay a one-time thing of $2,500 reimbursement, and that would alleviate a lot of financial stress. It wouldn't alleviate all of it, but a lot of it, and I was okay with that. Was able to get this. We were able to compromise on this. Is to say, okay, the city will pay for a majority of it. Lots of ideas back and forth on that, and this was by no means easy. I want that to be clear, and I think that's what governing is. Okay, it's never easy. Nor should it be, and we had to find a lot of common ground on how to do things, and I'm 100% fine with that. There were some really good ideas out there, and we had 11 recommendations, and I might provide them in the comments if you're curious and want to check those out, especially those who live in Lubbock. They were presented to the city council last Tuesday. There were some questions about it from some city council members. Oddly enough, none of them went to the open public meetings to comment. Of course they wouldn't. But and then it was approved and then was sent to city staff for them to fine-tune it and to do whatever that they need to do. We'll see what's going to happen here. I don't know if we're going to be called back into a session. I don't know what else to really call it. Sorry, for lack of a better word, session. Into meeting. They make us do that. I don't know, but I'm pretty proud of what we were able to accomplish. All of our heads were in the right space. Our hearts were in the right place, and so I was proud of what we were able to really do. Wanted to give a small report on that, and I'll put that link to that recommendation to this podcast. All right, that's all from me. Appreciate you listening in. Always, if you're able and willing to comment, send me an email, shoot me an email. Say that, hey, this is good, or you suck, or Keep the negative comments away. No, I'm only kidding. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you again very soon.